My name is Clara, and I'm 29 years old. At my own mother's 60th birthday party, my parents told me I was a disappointment and that I should leave the family forever. What they didn't know was that their decision was about to cost them everything, thanks to a secret my beloved grandmother had planted years before. If you're watching this from somewhere where a person's worth isn't measured by their bank account, take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe. You're going to want to hear how an old, overgrown garden exposed the truth and changed everything. My life has always been defined by dirt. The smell of damp earth after a rainstorm, the feel of rich loam under my fingernails, the magic of watching a tiny seed push its way out of the ground. I'm a landscape designer. I don't build financial empires or trade millions of dollars. I create green spaces, quiet sanctuaries in a loud world. It's my passion, my profession, and, according to my family, my greatest failure. The source of this injustice, the wound that has festered for years, stems from the relentless comparison between me and my brother, Leo. 2 years my junior, Leo is the golden child, the family's rising star. He's an investment banker who lives in a sleek high-rise downtown, drives a German car, and wears suits that cost more than 3 months of my rent. To my parents, Mark and Susan, Leo is the personification of success. He is proof of their superior parenting, a badge of honor they proudly display at country clubs and dinner parties. And me? I'm the baffling anomaly. She plays in the dirt, I once overheard my mother tell a friend on the phone, her voice tinged with a faint note of embarrassment. They had paid for a university degree in botany, expecting I'd pursue a prestigious career in corporate research or pharmaceuticals. Instead, I started my own small business, Verdant Visions, designing gardens for clients who appreciate a private slice of paradise more than an impressive balance sheet. It's steady work, I pay my own bills, and most importantly, I love it. But in my parents' eyes, it's a paid hobby, not a real career. The favoritism was etched into our family tapestry from early on. I remember when we both graduated from college, 2 years apart. Leo, with his business degree, was gifted a brand new BMW. My father clapped him on the back and said, "To get you started on the right foot, son." When I graduated with honors, I received a 10-year-old used Honda Civic. "It's reliable, Clara," my mother said, "and it won't attract any unnecessary attention." The message was clear. Leo's success was to be celebrated with extravagance. My existence was to be acknowledged with practicality. But the heart of this divide was the garden. It was my grandmother Eleanor's garden, who passed away 3 years ago. She was my mother's mother, a woman with a soul as old and wise as the oak trees she'd planted. Her house, the very house my parents now lived in, was surrounded by an acre of land she had transformed into a botanical masterpiece. It wasn't a perfectly manicured showpiece, but an intentional wilderness, with winding paths, secret nooks, and a collection of rare and heirloom plants she had gathered over a lifetime. To her, the garden was her legacy. To me, it was my sanctuary. To my parents and Leo, it was an expensive nuisance. After she passed, I took it upon myself to care for it. I spent every weekend pruning, weeding, and nurturing, not out of duty but out of love. It was where I felt closest to her, surrounded by her David Austin roses and her heritage azaleas. My parents allowed it, mostly because it saved them the money of hiring a professional landscaper. "Just as long as it doesn't look too overgrown, Clara," my father would warn. "We have an image to maintain in this neighborhood." They never understood. They never saw the complexity of the companion planting or the beauty of a self-sustaining ecosystem. They just saw chores. Leo was even worse. "Why do you waste your time with this?" he'd ask on his rare visits, gesturing at the garden with contempt. "How much money can you make growing tomatoes? Mom and Dad should just pave it over and put in a pool." Every word was a small knife in the heart of my grandmother's legacy. This dismissiveness was all coming to a head with my mother's upcoming 60th birthday. She'd made it clear she didn't want a fussy party at the house. Instead, she'd booked a private room at Aria, a minimalist, upscale restaurant where the food was served as tiny works of art and a glass of wine cost as much as my weekly grocery bill. It was the perfect stage for my family's particular brand of theater. I'd spent months on my gift, something I thought was heartfelt and meaningful. I painstakingly documented the history of my grandmother's garden, photographing every rare plant and writing out the stories she had told me about them. I had it bound into a beautiful, leather-clad book, a family heirloom to honor the woman who had shaped my mother. I hoped that, maybe this time, they would see the value in what I did. Maybe they would understand that legacy isn't always quantifiable in dollars and cents. I hoped naively that love could triumph over apathy. But as the day approached, a sense of dread settled in my stomach, cold and persistent like an autumn frost. I thought I could withstand whatever small slights they threw my way. But I had no idea that this birthday party wasn't just a celebration, but a tribunal. And the verdict had already been decided long ago. The catalyst, as it so often did in my family, came in the form of a carefully orchestrated, grand announcement. My mother's 60th birthday party was the stage. The restaurant, Aria, was cold and sterile. All white walls, chrome furniture, and waiters who moved with silent efficiency. It was the antithesis of the warm, chaotic, life-filled clutter of my grandmother's garden. It was my parents' world, a world of surfaces and calculated performances. I arrived on time, dressed in a simple but elegant dress, my carefully wrapped gift in hand. I was the first one there, besides my parents. My mother, Susan, looked stunning in a cobalt blue designer sheath, her blonde hair perfectly coiffed. She gave my gift a cursory glance. "Oh, thank you, Clara. Just put it over there." No curiosity, no warmth. My father, Mark, gave me a short nod, his eyes already scanning the room, probably assessing the decor. The guests began to arrive, my parents' close friends, a few distant relatives. The air filled with polite chatter, the clinking of wine glasses, and brittle, artificial laughter. I felt like an outsider, a background actor in someone else's play. And then, Leo arrived. He was 45 minutes late, a classic power move to ensure a grand entrance. He strode into the private room, his girlfriend, Tiffany, trailing in his wake, a woman who looked like she'd been sculpted from marble and condescension. Leo wore a perfectly tailored, wrinkle-free suit. He didn't walk. He glided, exuding an aura of self-satisfaction honed by years of unchecked praise. "Sorry I'm late, everyone," he boomed, his voice filling the room. Traffic was a nightmare. My parents lit up instantly. My mother rushed to hug him. "Leo, darling, I'm so glad you could make it." My father shook his hand firmly, an unmistakable smile of pride on his face. It was as if the party hadn't truly begun until the golden sun had made his appearance. They sat, and immediately, Leo became the center of attention. He regaled the table with stories of a massive merger deal, dropping the names of important people with casual precision. My parents hung on his every word, nodding and smiling at their friends as if to say, "See? This is our son." The gift opening came after the appetizers. My mother's presents were unwrapped: a designer handbag, a spa gift certificate, an exquisite diamond necklace from my father. Then it was my turn. My mother opened my gift almost as an afterthought. She flipped through the pages of the leather-bound book, a polite, frozen smile on her lips. "Oh, Clara, how thoughtful," she said, her voice devoid of genuine enthusiasm. She closed it and set it aside. What a sweet little project. Little project. My heart sank. Months of work, love, and memory reduced to a little project. Then, Leo stood up, a slim velvet box in his hand. "Mom?" he began, and the room fell silent. "You've always supported me, always believed in me. I wanted to give you something to show you how much I appreciate it." He opened the box to reveal a pair of tickets. "These are 2 first-class tickets to Paris and a week at the George V Hotel. I know you've always wanted to go." The room erupted in oohs and ahs. My mother gasped, real tears of joy welling in her eyes. She threw her arms around Leo. "Oh, Leo, I can't believe it!" My father clapped him on the back, beaming. My gift, lying forlorn on the pile of discarded wrapping paper, seemed to shrink in shame. But that wasn't the real catalyst. That was just the warm-up act. After the excitement over Paris died down, Leo raised his glass again. "And on that note," he said, a smug grin playing on his lips, "I have one more announcement. Tiffany and I are engaged." He turned to Tiffany, who held up her left hand to flash a diamond so large it was almost comical. Joyful chaos ensued once more. My parents were ecstatic. "A wedding!" my mother cried. "We're finally getting a wedding in the family." Leo let the excitement settle before delivering the final blow. "And we just put a deposit down on a new penthouse apartment in the seaport. Figured we'd need more space for the future." There it was. The 1-2-3 punch. The luxury trip. The engagement. The penthouse. It was a manifesto of success, designed to cement his position as the worthy heir and to highlight my own perceived mediocrity. As I sat there, clapping weakly along with everyone else, I felt a chill spread through me. This wasn't just a birthday celebration, it was a deliberate transfer of power. They weren't just elevating Leo, they were actively diminishing me, creating an unbridgeable chasm between us. The catalyst event wasn't just Leo's announcement, it was my parents' complete and total embrace of the values he represented, and with it, the complete and total rejection of mine. The storm had been triggered, and I could feel the winds of resentment and disappointment beginning to rise, swirling directly around me. I just didn't know it was going to make a direct hit before the night was over. The escalation was swift and brutal. Following Leo's announcements, the entire mood of the dinner shifted. It was no longer a celebration. It had become the Leo show. I tried to recede into the background, hoping to become invisible, but my parents seemed to have another agenda. They were determined to use the contrast between their two children to amplify Leo's success. The first incident happened during a conversation with one of my father's friends, a wealthy property developer named Mr. Henderson. "So, Clara," he asked politely, "how's your little business going? Still playing with flowers?" Before I could answer, my father jumped in with a hollow laugh. "Clara's our artistic soul, Tom," he said, his tone making it clear that artistic was a synonym for unemployed. "While Leo is building the future, Clara tends to the past. She looks after Eleanor's old garden. It's a good hobby, keeps her busy. Keeps me busy, as if I were a child who needed entertaining." The condescension toward my work, the career I had painstakingly built, was galling. I tried to defend myself. "Actually, the business is going very well, Mr. Henderson. I just landed a contract to landscape the entire grounds of a new condominium complex in Brookline." My mother waved it away. "Those are small jobs, dear. Nothing like the deal Leo just closed, is it, Leo?" Leo, basking in the attention, smirked. "That deal is going to finance the construction of an entire office tower, Mom. A little different from picking out shrubbery." The table laughed, and I felt my cheeks flush with heat. They had turned me into the punchline, making my accomplishments seem small and trivial. The humiliation was a physical weight. Next came the assault on my personal life. My Aunt Carol, my mother's sister, turned to me. "It's so wonderful that Leo is settling down," she said, then looked at me with a face full of pity. "What about you, Clara? Seeing anyone special?" I was single, and contentedly so. I was focused on my career, but in my family's world, a single 9-year-old woman was a sad anomaly. My mother sighed dramatically. "We keep telling Clara she needs to put herself out there more, but she'd rather spend her time in that garden. It's not healthy to be so obsessed with plants." "Exactly," chimed in Tiffany, Leo's fiancée, her voice sickly sweet. "Leo and I met at a charity gala. You have to be in the world, Clara. You're not going to meet anyone digging in the dirt." The two-pronged attack on my work and my love life felt like a coordinated strike. I tried to talk to them, to explain. "I'm happy, Mom. I don't feel like I'm missing out on anything. My work brings me joy. Joy doesn't pay the bills, Clara, my father said sharply. And it certainly doesn't give us grandchildren. Leo is building a legacy. You're growing flowers that will be dead by winter. I was stunned. The cruelty of that statement, the utter negation of my life's worth, took my breath away. I looked around the table, searching for an ounce of support, a sympathetic glance. Most people avoided my gaze, uncomfortable but unwilling to challenge their hosts. Only one person spoke up. My cousin Chloe, Aunt Carol's daughter, who had always been closer to me than to her own mother. I think what Clara does is amazing, she said, quietly but firmly. She creates beauty and brings people peace. Not everything is about money. My mother shot Chloe a look that could cut glass. Oh, Chloe, you're still young. You'll understand when you're older. Chloe, who was a year older than me and a successful pediatric nurse, just gave a subtle shake of her head. Her attempt at intervention only made my parents dig in their heels. They saw it as a challenge to their authority. The escalation continued. When dessert was served, the conversation turned to my grandmother's house. Now that Leo is engaged, we really have to think about the house, my mother said, as if I wasn't even there. Leo's apartment is wonderful, but once they have children, they'll need a yard. I've been saying we should sell it, Leo said. That land is worth a fortune. We could split the money and I could use my share to invest. Clara could use hers to get a small apartment somewhere. More appropriate. More appropriate. Code for cheaper. We can't sell it, I finally said, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. It was Grandma's home. That garden was her legacy. My father scoffed. Legacy doesn't pay the property taxes, Clara. The house is too big for us now. The upkeep is a nightmare. And that garden is a bottomless money pit. You don't contribute a cent to its maintenance, do you? I contribute my time, I countered. Hundreds of hours. I do it because I loved Grandma and I respect what she built. Love doesn't fix a leaky roof, he shot back. Leo has a practical plan. You have sentimental nonsense. I felt like I was in a courtroom where every aspect of my life and my beliefs was being tried and found wanting. I tried to reason, to explain that value wasn't always monetary. But it was like speaking a different language. They couldn't, or wouldn't, understand. After dinner, as guests were leaving, Chloe pulled me aside near the restrooms. Are you okay, Clara? She asked. Her eyes filled with genuine concern. I don't know, I whispered, feeling hot tears threatening to spill. Am I overreacting? Am I just being too sensitive? No, she said forcefully, taking my hand. They are being awful. The way they treat you, the way they've always treated you, is not okay. You are a kind, talented, hard-working person. Don't you ever let them make you think otherwise? Her validation, the confirmation from an outside voice that I wasn't crazy, felt like a life raft in a sea of gaslighting. It gave me the strength to face what was coming next. I knew the night wasn't over. The escalation had reached its peak, and I could feel that something was about to break. But even then, I couldn't have imagined how cruel and final the tipping point would be. They had spent the entire evening slowly chipping away at my self-worth, and now they were ready to deliver the final, killing blow. The final drop didn't fall with a loud crash, but with a quiet, calculated coldness that was more brutal than any shouting match. After the last guest had departed, it was just me, my parents, Leo, and Tiffany left in the private room of the restaurant. The staff cleaned quietly around us, their presence a silent reminder that we had overstayed our welcome. I was gathering my things, desperate to escape the suffocating atmosphere and go home. Well, that was a wonderful evening, my mother said, her voice still buzzing with the excitement of Leo's announcements. It was, my father agreed, looking directly at me. It really put things in perspective. I knew what was coming. I could feel it coiling in the air. I think I should get going, I said, reaching for my purse. Wait, Clara, my mother said, her tone suddenly serious. "Your father and I need to talk to you." Leo and Tiffany sat back, smug expressions on their faces. They knew their role in this drama. They were the invited audience. We sat in silence for a moment. My father steepled his fingers on the table, looking at me as if I were an underperforming employee in an annual review. "Clara," he began, "your mother and I have been worried about you. For a long time. We've supported you. We've encouraged you. But we're not seeing any real progress." "Oh, progress?" I repeated, my voice hoarse. "My business is growing. I'm financially independent. Is that not progress?" "That's not the kind of progress we mean," my mother interjected. "Look at your brother. He has a career, a fiancé, a future. He's building a life. What are you doing? You're hiding in a garden." "It's not hiding," I said, my voice starting to shake. "It's living. I'm happy with my life." "Oh, but we're not happy with it," my father said flatly, and the words hit me with physical force. "It reflects poorly on us. Our friends ask what you're doing, and we have to say our daughter is a gardener, while their sons and daughters are doctors and lawyers. And now your son is a successful investment banker," I said, bitterness creeping into my voice. "Yes," my father said. "Leo understands the importance of family, of creating a legacy we can be proud of. You don't seem to grasp that. You only care about your flowers and your trees. You're clinging to the past, to things that belonged to your grandmother, instead of building your own future." This was it, the final assault. They were twisting my love for my grandmother into a weakness, my dedication to her legacy into a character flaw. My mother reached out and placed her hand on my father's, a gesture of solidarity against me. "Darling," she said, her voice dripping with false pity. "Perhaps it's time you stood on your own 2 feet. Really, without our safety net, without the garden to hide in." I looked at them, from my mother to my father, and then to Leo, who was watching the display with an almost imperceptible smirk. He had won. He had successfully excised me. "What are you saying?" I asked, though in my heart I already knew. My father took a deep breath. "We think it's probably best if you went your own way, Clara. Left the house, found your own place, and stopped depending on us emotionally. Left the family, for a while. Maybe when you've made something of yourself, something we can actually be proud of, we can talk again." The coldness of it. It wasn't said in anger. It was delivered with deliberate, calculated intent. It was a disownment. They weren't throwing me out in a fit of rage. They were methodically pruning me, like an unwanted branch. "Maybe for good," my mother added quietly, as a final punctuation. In that moment, everything clicked into place. Every small slight, every comparison, every belittling remark, it had all been leading to this. They weren't just disappointed in my life choices, they were ashamed of me. I was a stain on their perfect picture, and they had decided it was time to erase it. I stood up, my legs feeling unsteady. I looked at the faces of the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. I saw no love. I saw disappointment, judgment, and a cold, hard relief. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. Something inside me died in that moment, the hope that they would one day understand. "All right," I said, and my voice sounded terrifyingly calm and distant. "If that's what you want." I turned and walked out of the room, leaving them sitting there in their triumphant silence. As I walked out into the cold night air, their words echoed in my head. Left the family, maybe for good. They had pushed me out, but as I sat in my car, the tears finally coming, a thought began to form in the back of my mind, a tiny ember in the ashes of their rejection. They thought they had taken everything from me. They had no idea they had just handed me the key to take everything from them. The devastation of that night was profound. I drove back to my small apartment in a daze, my parents' words replaying like a death sentence. Leave the family for good. I spent the night in a state of suspended animation, somewhere between disbelief and agonizing pain. My family, the bedrock of my life, however fractured, had officially cast me out. The next morning, instead of sinking into despair, another feeling began to surface. A cold, clear anger. They had pushed me too far. They had underestimated me for the last time. And then I remembered my grandmother Eleanor. I remembered our last conversation, a few weeks before she passed. She was frail in bed, but her eyes were still sharp and bright. "Clara, my girl," she had whispered, taking my hand. "This world will try to tell you what you're worth. Don't you listen. Your worth is here," she said, pointing to my heart. "And here," she said, gesturing out the window toward the garden. "You remember that. And you remember that I've taken care of you." "I've taken care of you." At the time, I thought she meant emotionally. Now, another meaning began to sprout. Instead of going to work, I drove to my grandmother's house, my parents' house now. I still had a key to the back gate for my garden work. I didn't go inside the house. Instead, I went straight to the small potting shed at the back of the property, her sanctum sanctorum. Inside, the smell of earth and dried lavender still lingered. I went to her old wooden workbench. Behind a stack of empty terracotta pots was a loose board in the wall she'd shown me as a girl. Our secret hiding place, she'd called it. My hands trembled as I pried it open. Inside was an old tin box. I opened it. On top was a thick envelope with my name written in her elegant looping script. Inside the envelope was a letter, a small ornate key, and a business card. The card read, "Arthur Davison, estate attorney." It had an address on Beacon Hill. I read the letter first. "My dearest Clara, if you are reading this, it means I am gone, and you are in need of a little guidance. I have watched how they treat you, Clara. Your mother's impatience, your father's disappointment, Leo's jealousy. They are good people at heart, but they have lost their way, blinded by the shiny, hollow things of this world. They do not see the real wealth right in front of them, the wealth of kindness, of creativity, and of nurturing living things. I worry for your future, not because you are weak, but because you are strong, and your heart is too open. They will take advantage of that. They will try to make you feel small so that they can feel big. That is why I have made certain arrangements. My will is not as simple as they believe. This key is to a safe deposit box at Boston Central Bank. Inside, you will find a copy of my true last will and testament and my private gardening journals. Take them both to Mr. Davison. He knows what to do. He is a good man. He understands. Protect my legacy, Clara. But more importantly, protect yourself. It's time the garden taught them a lesson. All my love. Forever. Grandma Eleanor." Tears streamed down my cheeks as I read, but this time they were tears of gratitude and resolve. My grandmother had seen it all. She had known, and she had left me a weapon. I wasted no time. I drove to the bank, used the key, and opened the box. Inside, just as she'd promised, was a stamped legal document and a thick, leather-bound, well-worn journal. I called Mr. Davison's office and made an emergency appointment for that afternoon. Arthur Davison's law office was old and dignified, with floor-to-ceiling mahogany bookshelves and the smell of old paper. Mr. Davison was an older gentleman with kind eyes and a firm handshake. He remembered my grandmother well. "Eleanor was a firecracker," he said as I sat down, "a woman of deep conviction and a mischievous twinkle in her eye." I told him everything, the birthday party, the public humiliation, the disownment. I handed him my grandmother's letter, the will from the box, and the journals. He read the letter, nodding as if it confirmed what he already knew. Then he reviewed the will carefully. "This is it," he said. "The will your parents signed off on after the funeral was a standard, preliminary version. Eleanor structured her final will as a living trust, set to trigger after a certain period of time or when certain conditions were met. She anticipated a scenario just like this," he explained. "My family believed the will divided the estate, including the house, into 3 equal parts between my mother, my Aunt Carol, and a distant cousin. But that was only half the truth. The real will had an overriding clause, a provision Mr. Davison called the Legacy Keeper Clause. "Oh, this clause," he explained, "states that sole and total ownership of the house and all remaining estate assets, including her considerable investment portfolio, shall be transferred to the heir who can demonstrate, within 3 years of her passing, to have actively and faithfully maintained and preserved the botanical legacy of the garden, according to the principles and instructions detailed in her official gardening journals." He tapped the leather-bound journal on his desk. "And this, I believe, is the journal in question." I was stunned. It wasn't just a clause, it was a test that only one person could possibly pass. "Your parents and your brother," Mr. Davison continued, "do they know about this journal? Have they ever participated in the garden's care?" "No," I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. "They hate the garden. They call it a money pit. They want to pave it over." "Well then," Mr. Davison said, his own eyes taking on my grandmother's mischievous twinkle, "it seems we have a clear winner. The next step is to call an official reading of the will. I will notify all interested parties, including your parents and brother. We will present this clause and ask for proof of compliance." The plan was set. It was audacious, simple, and perfect. I wouldn't have to fight or argue. I would simply have to present the truth. My grandmother's legacy wasn't in money or property. It was in love, dedication, and care. She had turned my love for the garden into the key to everything. I left Mr. Davison's office feeling light and powerful. The pain of the previous night had been replaced by a clean, sharp sense of purpose. They had tried to take my family. Now, I was going to show them what family legacy truly meant. The game had changed, and for the first time in my life, I was holding all the cards. The confrontation took place a week later, not in a cold restaurant, but in the stately confines of Mr. Davison's law office. The stage was perfectly set for the drama that was about to unfold. I arrived early, sitting beside Mr. Davison at the polished mahogany conference table. I had brought my evidence, a photo album documenting the garden's progress over the last 3 years, a thick folder of receipts for heirloom seeds and specialized tools, and most importantly, a copy of my own personal notebooks, where I had detailed my weekly gardening activities, unwittingly mirroring my grandmother's methods. My parents and Leo arrived together, walking into the room with an air of confidence that bordered on arrogance. They assumed this meeting was a mere formality, the final piece of paperwork to formalize the division of assets they thought they knew. They saw me sitting there with a flicker of surprise. "Clara?" my mother said, irritation heavy in her voice. "What are you doing here? I thought we made things clear." "Mr. Davison requested my presence," I replied calmly, my gaze steady. They took their seats opposite us, Leo glancing at his watch, clearly annoyed by the inconvenience. "Can we make this quick, Arthur?" he said to Mr. Davison. "Some of us have actual jobs to get back to." Mr. Davison adjusted his glasses. "Of course, Leo. Let's begin." He started by reading the standard parts of the will they were already familiar with, pertaining to small, personal items and charitable donations. My parents nodded along, looking bored. "And now, Mr. Davison said, his tone shifting slightly, "we come to the main body of the estate, the house in Chestnut Hill, and the associated financial assets." He paused, looking over his glasses at each of them. "As you are made aware, Eleanor's initial intent was to divide this property. However, her final will contains an overriding provision, the Legacy Keeper Clause." I saw a flicker of confusion on my mother's face. "The what clause?" Mr. Davison read the clause aloud, his voice clear and methodical. He enunciated every word, detailing the requirement to maintain and preserve the botanical legacy, according to the instructions in her official gardening journals. When he finished, a thick silence filled the room. "That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard," my father finally said, breaking the quiet. "Was Eleanor senile? A gardening journal?" "Not at all, Mark," Mr. Davison said firmly. "She was perfectly lucid. She simply attached a condition to the inheritance. He placed my grandmother's leather-bound journal on the table. This is the journal in question. The question for you all now is, who among you can provide evidence of compliance with this clause? Leo let out a short, contemptuous laugh. Are you kidding? None of us has time to dig in the dirt. This is a joke. I assure you, it is no joke, Mr. Davison said. It is a legally binding document. If no one can meet the condition, the entire estate is to be liquidated and donated to the Boston Botanical Garden. Panic began to dawn on my parents' faces. Leo's smirk vanished. They looked at each other, the realization dawning that the fortune they had taken for granted was slipping through their fingers. Well, my father stammered, we paid for the upkeep, lawn mowing and such. The clause specifies care according to Eleanor's methods, Mr. Davison reminded him. Not just basic maintenance. It requires knowledge of her specific plant species, her planting schedules, her organic techniques. He turned to me. Clara, do you have anything to present? This was my moment. I calmly slid the photo album across the table. This is a photographic record of the garden for the past 3 years, season by season. Then I pushed the folder of receipts over. These are receipts for seeds, organic fertilizers, and tools consistent with my grandmother's recommendations. Finally, I placed my own notebook next to my grandmother's journal. And this is my gardening log, detailing my weekly activities. I believe you'll find it matches the schedule and philosophy in my grandmother's journal precisely. Mr. Davison opened my notebook and her journal, laying them side by side. He flipped through a few pages, nodding slowly. The June rose pruning, the fall application of bone meal to the azaleas, the crop rotation in the vegetable patch. It's all here. It matches perfectly. He looked up, his gaze solemn. Based on the evidence presented, it is clear that only one person has met the conditions of Eleanor Alexander's will. According to the terms of this document, I hereby declare Clara Bishop the sole heir to the house in Chestnut Hill and all associated estate assets. The implosion was immediate. What? Leo screamed, shooting out of his chair. No way! She planned this! She tricked us! This is fraud! My father bellowed, his face turning a deep shade of crimson. You knew about this, Clara. You manipulated us all. My mother just sat there, her mouth agape, her expression a mixture of disbelief and utter betrayal. I knew nothing about this clause until last week, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. I took care of that garden because I loved my grandmother. I took care of it because it was the right thing to do. It turns out, she knew that doing the right thing was the only thing that mattered. I turned to my parents. You told me I was a disappointment because I played in the dirt. You told me I should leave the family forever because I wasn't creating a legacy you could be proud of. But you were wrong. Grandma's legacy wasn't in a bank account. It was in the very earth you despised. And because I was the only one who understood that, it's all mine now. We'll sue! Leo shouted. We'll prove she was incompetent! Good luck with that, Mr. Davison said coolly. Eleanor had a full psychiatric evaluation conducted a week before signing this will. She was given a perfect bill of health. This will is ironclad. They were beaten and they knew it. Their arrogance dissolved into impotent rage. They had been outmaneuvered by the one thing they could never comprehend. Unconditional love. I stood up. I believe our meeting is over, I said. Dad, Mom, Leo, I'll need you to have your personal belongings removed from my house within the next 30 days. I walked out of the room, leaving them to sit in the wreckage of their own greed and hubris, the sound of their stunned silence, the sweetest music I had ever heard. Leaving the law office that day felt like stepping out of a hurricane and into clean, fresh air. The weight of years of being undervalued, of having to fight for my own worth, was lifted. I didn't feel triumphant in a malicious way. Instead, I felt a profound sense of vindication, of peace. My grandmother had given me more than a house. She had given me back myself. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. My first act was to call a locksmith to the house in Chestnut Hill. As I stood there, watching the man change the locks on the front door I had walked through 1,000 times, the sense of real ownership settled in. This was my house, not my parents' house, not a place I was a guest. Mine. Predictably, my phone blew up with angry texts and calls. My father left rambling voicemails full of vague threats of legal action. My mother left tearful messages accusing me of destroying the family. Leo sent a single text. "You will pay for this." I didn't respond. Instead, I followed Mr. Davison's advice and blocked their numbers. For now, I needed space to breathe. The news spread quickly through the extended family. My Aunt Carol called, her voice a mix of awe and admiration. "My mother always said Eleanor was the smartest one in the room," she said. "Now I see why." My cousin Chloe came over with a bottle of champagne. We sat on the back porch, overlooking the garden, and she said, "This is poetic justice, Clara. Gardener's justice." Their support meant the world. It reminded me that family isn't just the people who share your blood. The real challenge was clearing out the house. My parents, in an act of petty defiance, left all of their belongings until the very last day of the 30-day deadline. I hired a professional moving company to carefully pack their things and move them to a storage unit for which I had prepaid 3 months' rent. I left them a simple message with the address and the key code. I wanted no more confrontations. Walking through the empty house, once their furniture was gone, was surreal. It was like shedding an old skin. The house breathed again. It no longer felt stuffy with the formal, ill-fitting furniture my mother had chosen. I could feel my grandmother's spirit there, in the light that streamed through the windows, in the creak of the floorboards. I didn't move in right away. Instead, I began the process of making it my own. I painted over the drab, beige walls with warm, garden-inspired colors, sage green, terracotta, sunflower, yellow. I tore up the thick carpet my mother had installed and refinished the original hardwood floors beneath. During this time, I lived in my rental, but every day I went to the house, working on it, and of course, tending the garden. The garden became my therapy. As I pulled weeds, I felt like I was pulling out the criticism and negativity that had taken root in me for so long. As I planted new flowers, I felt like I was sowing the seeds of my own future. I heard bits and pieces about my family through Chloe. My parents had rented an apartment in a faceless suburban complex. They were shocked and humiliated. Their perfect image was shattered. Leo, ever arrogant, had refused to help them financially, saying he had his own wedding and penthouse to worry about. The cracks in their alliance were already forming. As the first month alone came to a close, I stood in my freshly painted living room, looking out at the garden that was beginning to burst with the first spring blooms. An overwhelming sense of freedom washed over me. I hadn't just inherited a house. I had inherited the chance to build a life on my own terms, unburdened by judgment and unrealistic expectations. My new dawn had arrived, not with a flourish of trumpets, but with the sound of birdsong in the garden and the deep, quiet peace of finally being home. 9 months after that fateful reading of the will, the transformation of my life was so complete that it felt like a different era entirely. The seasons had turned, and with them, the entire landscape of my existence had been reshaped. The house in Chestnut Hill was no longer a symbol of my family's status or my grandmother's past. It was a living, breathing extension of my own soul. The sterile guest rooms that had sat unused for years were now filled with light and purpose. One had become my home office, its walls covered in corkboards pinned with sketches of future projects, fabric swatches, and pressed flowers. The other was a true guest room, with a comfortable bed and stacks of books, a welcoming space for friends like Chloe, who often stayed over after we'd spent an evening talking late into the night. The business, Verdant Visions, had not just grown, it had blossomed in ways I could never have anticipated. Word of my story had spread through a combination of local news articles about the community workshops and the simple, powerful force of word of mouth. Clients weren't just hiring a landscape designer. They felt they were hiring a custodian of a legacy. They were drawn to the philosophy that my grandmother had embedded in the soil, that a garden should be a partnership with nature, not a conquest of it. This authenticity became my brand. I was no longer just a gardener. I was a respected expert in sustainable horticulture and heritage landscape design. I had a waiting list that stretched for over a year. The irony was rich and deeply satisfying. The very passion my parents had belittled as a sweet little project had become a more successful and respected enterprise than they could have imagined. My first employee, Sarah, a bright young graduate from my own alma mater, was now managing the day-to-day installations, freeing me up to focus on design, client consultations, and the community outreach that had become so important to me. The community workshops were perhaps the most rewarding part of my new life. On the first Saturday of every month, the garden would come alive with the laughter of children discovering where carrots come from, and the thoughtful questions of adults learning the alchemy of turning kitchen scraps into rich compost. I saw lonely retirees find companionship over a shared love of hydrangeas, and I watched stressed-out young professionals visibly relax as they put their hands in the dirt. In a way, I was serving the community the same peace the garden had always served me. This was the legacy my grandmother truly intended, not a static museum of plants, but a dynamic hub of growth, connection, and education. It was a legacy of generosity, a stark contrast to the legacy of acquisition my brother was so desperately trying to build. And what of my family? Justice, I learned, is not always a dramatic thunderclap of retribution. More often, it's a slow, quiet erosion, the natural consequence of building your life on an unstable foundation. For Leo, the foundation was money and ego, and both proved to be remarkably fragile. The lavish wedding was a hollow spectacle, more a performance for their social circle than a celebration of love. The debt they incurred was a constant strain, but the real blow came from the market. Leo, in his arrogance, had always favored high-risk, high-reward strategies. It was a form of gambling dressed up in a suit. When a volatile turn in the global markets wiped out his key investments, he had no safety net. He hadn't diversified. He had only doubled down on his own perceived genius. The fallout was catastrophic. He lost his job at the investment firm amidst accusations of recklessness. The penthouse, which they could no longer afford, was sold in a panic, for far less than they had paid. Tiffany, whose affection had always seemed directly correlated with Leo's net worth, did not handle the transition to a life of relative modesty with grace. According to Chloe, their arguments were frequent and bitter. The man she had married, the powerful, confident provider, had been replaced by a stressed, defeated man struggling to find a new job in an industry that now viewed him with suspicion. The last I heard, they were living in a 2-bedroom rental in a suburb they once would have sneered at, the massive diamond ring conspicuously absent from her finger in recent social media posts. His skyscraper of success had been built on sand, and the tide had come in. My parents' reckoning was quieter, but, in many ways, more profound. Their entire identity had been wrapped up in their status, the grand house, the successful son, the perfect family image they projected. With all of that stripped away, they were left with nothing but each other and the uncomfortable truth of their own choices. Living in a small, generic apartment, they could no longer host the lavish parties that had been the cornerstone of their social life. Many of their friends, who had been attracted to their status, simply stopped calling. The phone calls I received from my mother in those first few months were a strange mix of self-pity and bewildered anger. She couldn't understand how this had happened. It was during one of those calls that a crack in her denial finally appeared. "Your Aunt Carol's daughter just got into Harvard Law," she said, her voice flat. Carol went on and on about it for an hour. In the past, she would have countered with one of Leo's achievements. Now she had nothing. There was a long pause, and then she said something that stunned me. "You know, your grandmother used to say that pride was the most useless weed in the garden. It chokes out everything else and bears no fruit." It was the first time she had ever quoted her mother to me, with what sounded like genuine understanding. That was the turning point that led to her asking to visit the garden. That first visit was awkward. She wandered the paths like a tourist in her own history, but she kept coming back. She started asking questions timidly at first, then with growing curiosity. What is this one called again? Why do you plant these two together? She was, in her own way, trying to learn the language she had ignored for a lifetime. She was trying to get to know her mother through the garden, and in doing so, she was starting, just barely, to get to know me. My father's journey was even more silent. A man defined by his role as a provider and a patriarch, he was utterly adrift. He felt he had failed. His son was a mess, his wife was depressed, and the daughter he had dismissed was now the sole proprietor of the family's greatest asset. His offering of a new lawnmower was, I realized, an act of immense vulnerability. It was him admitting, in the only way he knew how, that the world he understood, a world of practical, tangible things, was the only place he felt he could still contribute. It was an olive branch, and I took it. Our relationship is not fixed. There are scars that will likely never fade completely. But the dynamic has fundamentally shifted. They are no longer the arbiters of my worth. They come to my house, to my garden, as guests. There is a new-found, fragile respect in their eyes. They are seeing me, perhaps for the first time, not as their disappointing daughter, but as a capable woman who built a life on the very principles they had discarded. The justice served wasn't that they lost everything. It was that in losing it, they were forced to finally see what they had possessed all along and had never valued. The quiet triumph wasn't in owning the house. It was in watching my mother, gently deadhead a rose, her hands clumsy but her intentions sincere, finally learning the lesson my grandmother had been trying to teach her all along. As I stand here now, 10 months after my world was both shattered and rebuilt, the lessons that this journey has taught me feel as deeply rooted and complex as the oldest oak in my grandmother's garden. When I look back at the woman I was at that disastrous birthday party, the Clara who flinched at every backhanded compliment, who absorbed every ounce of disappointment from her parents, who measured her own worth against the blinding, artificial glare of her brother's success, I barely recognize her. The pain of that night, the cold, clinical precision of their disownment, felt like an ending. I believed they had severed me from my roots, leaving me to wither. But they were wrong. What felt like being buried was actually being planted. The most profound lesson, the one that whispers to me in the rustling leaves and the hum of the bees, is about the nature of value. My entire life, my family had operated under a very specific, very narrow definition of worth. It was a currency of prestige, of financial gain, of things that could be listed on a resume or displayed in a showroom. It was loud, shiny, and ultimately hollow. Leo was the embodiment of this philosophy. His worth was his title, his bonus, the square footage of his penthouse. In their eyes, he was a towering skyscraper, and I was, at best, a humble wildflower in his shadow. They spent so much time looking up at his achievements that they forgot to look down at the ground beneath their feet, the very foundation that held them up. My grandmother understood the truth. She knew that real value isn't acquired. It's cultivated. It's the slow, patient work of nurturing something from a fragile seed into a resilient, fruit-bearing plant. It's the quiet satisfaction of creating life and beauty where there was once nothing. It's the legacy found not in a stock portfolio, but in the taste of a homegrown tomato, the scent of a heritage rose, or the shade of a tree you planted knowing you might never sit under it yourself. The garden taught me that the most valuable things in life are often the quietest. They don't scream for attention. They don't need validation from an audience. Their worth is inherent, found in their ability to sustain, to nourish, and to endure. My family saw the garden as a liability, a money pit, a drain on resources. They failed to see it was the greatest asset they had, a living testament to patience, wisdom, and love. This journey also forced me to confront the painful but liberating truth about family itself. I was raised with the belief that family is an unbreakable bond, an unconditional source of love and support. My experience proved that sometimes The title of family is used as a license for disrespect. The bond can become a cage, and the love can become so conditional that it ceases to be love at all. The expectation was that I should tolerate the constant comparisons, the dismissiveness, the emotional manipulation, simply because we shared DNA. Walking away from that felt like the ultimate betrayal, but it was, in fact, the ultimate act of self-preservation. And in the space that their departure created, a new kind of family began to grow. My cousin Chloe, who spoke up for me when no one else would. Mr. Davison, who honored my grandmother's wishes with such integrity and kindness. My new employee, who shares my passion with an infectious enthusiasm. The neighbors and community members who come to the workshops, sharing stories and seeds. This is my chosen family. It's a family built not on obligation or accident of birth, but on a foundation of mutual respect, shared values, and genuine admiration. They are the people who celebrate my successes without feeling threatened, and who would offer a hand not to pull me up to their level, but to help me tend to the ground where I stand. This, I've learned, is the sturdiest kind of family their island. But perhaps the most difficult and most crucial lesson was in learning to set boundaries. For years, I allowed my emotional well-being to be dictated by my family's approval. I would shrink myself to make them feel comfortable, silence my own achievements so as not to seem boastful in the face of Leo's grandeur. A boundary, I realized, is not a wall you build to keep people out. It's a line you draw in the soil around yourself that says, "This is me. This is where I begin. My peace, my worth, and my happiness are not up for negotiation." The moment I told them to remove their belongings from my house was the moment I drew that line for the first time. It was terrifying. Every instinct screamed at me to appease them, to smooth things over, to be the good daughter I was always conditioned to be. But my grandmother's legacy gave me the strength to hold that line. And in doing so, I discovered that true strength isn't about winning an argument. It's about refusing to participate in a dynamic that diminishes you. My relationship with my parents now exists only because of these new boundaries. It's tentative and fragile, but it's more honest than it has ever been, because it's based on their slow, dawning respect for me as an individual, not as a failed version of their expectations. Finally, I learned about the true meaning of forgiveness. For a long time, I carried a burning anger towards them. How could they be so cruel, so blind? But as I poured my energy into the garden and into my new life, I realized that holding on to that anger was like carefully tending a patch of poison ivy in the middle of my beautiful flower beds. It was only harming me. Forgiveness, I've discovered, isn't about saying what they did was okay. It will never be okay. Forgiveness is about accepting that I cannot change who they are, but I can refuse to let their limitations define my future. It's about taking the key to my own happiness out of their hands. My forgiveness is for me. It's the act of gently uprooting that poison ivy so that something healthier has room to grow in its place. My life is quiet now, in the best possible way. The frantic energy I used to spend anticipating my family's moods has been repurposed into designing a new perennial bed. The anxiety I felt before every family gathering has been replaced by the peaceful anticipation of watching the sun rise over the garden with a cup of coffee. I have built a life that is authentic to its core. A life my grandmother would recognize. She didn't just give me a house, she gave me a roadmap back to myself. The greatest injustice they ever committed against me was convincing me I was small. The greatest gift my grandmother gave me was the proof that I had been growing all along. Have you ever had to face a situation where your family's definition of success was completely different from your own? Have you ever had to draw a difficult boundary to protect your own peace and well-being? I would love to hear your story and the lessons you learned in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, and if you believe in the power of quiet strength and unconventional legacies, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming family challenges. Remember to share this video with someone who might need to be reminded that their path is valid, their passion is worthy, and their worth is not determined by the opinions of others. Thank you for listening. and may you always have the courage to find and fiercely protect your own garden.